Hello everyone, my name is Jenna, but you guys can call me Jen. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Hi, hello, welcome to a little bit of an interesting recommendation video. I reached out to folks through my recent vlog and on Instagram once I had gathered a few ideas to see what you guys wanted to see from me this week. So if you're not following me on my other socials, please do, because sometimes I do that. Sometimes I ask you guys to chime in on what you want to see from me. And I am always open to suggestions if you leave them in the comments, if you have anything in particular you want to see from me. So I'm here for you. My lovely friend Sophia left me a beautiful comment on my recent vlog. She gave me 2 ideas that then spiraled into a third. So she gave me an idea for romance books that I love as a fantasy reader, which then spiraled into my own idea of like YA books that I love as an adult fantasy reader. So those 2 are ideas on the docket. And the third idea is what I'm going to be talking about today, which are some recommendations for Women's History Month. I think Sophia said that it was like favorite recent reads from women writers. And so I'm going to take that and I'm going to spin it a little bit. So thank you, Sophia, for your amazing ideas. They're all on the docket now and I'm definitely going to do them. Today we're going to talk about some women writers. My iced coffee is very watered down, but that's okay. And today I have kind of, when I was gathering my recent reads, some women writers for my recent reads, I started realizing they were kind of falling into very like little categories as it was going on. So I decided to kind of play with that a little bit, and I have 2 recommendations from each of these categories that I have collected. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 categories plus a TBR. So without further ado, we're just gonna get into it. 2 recommendations from each category, and they all kind of fall under like a genre then a subgenre, or like a genre and like a trope kind of a thing. So we're just gonna get into it, and I hope you find a recommendation for today. But I also want you guys to leave me recommendations below of some of your favorite women writers that you've read recently. I could even limit it just to 2024. What are some of your favorite books that you've read from women writers and that you want to share in my comments for Women's History Month? Because we gotta celebrate women this month. We love it. Let's start over yonder. So the first category we have today is fantasy as a genre, and then as a subgenre, we're going with horror. So I got 2 books, as I said. First one is a little novella. It's called What Moves the Dead by T.K. Fisher. You guys know how much I love T.K. Fisher. You guys know how much I love this book in particular. So this is a retelling of the short story written by Edgar Allan Poe called The Fall of the House of Usher. This is a fantastic book. I absolutely ate this up. And since reading it and absolutely loving it, I have seen a lot of people out there not liking it very much. So this is my recommendation for those of you who are like me, not necessarily a horror girly, but you want something a little spooky, scary, and you want something that is very literary, and perhaps you read The Fall of the House of Usher in university and thought it was wonderful, but thought it was very short, and you wanted something that is a good fleshing out of that short story. This is for you. Also, if you like fungal horror, pick this up. Is it Sporer? Is that what it is? Well, I think that's what the girlies are calling it, but this is very fun. So if you know anything about The Fall of the House of Usher, it basically follows a protagonist who goes to a manor house, is called by some old friends of theirs, gets some letters from the brother of the family basically saying like, something is wrong with my sister, please come and help. It's kind of a little creepy haunting. Something's going on with the house. Something's going on with the siblings. There's some more people there. This is a really beautiful fleshed out version of the short story. And I fucking loved it. I think it was perfectly done. I loved the horror elements in here. And as an English major, as someone with an English degree who studied The Fall of the House of Usher in university, I fucking loved this. So maybe this was written just for me, but I loved it. So the next one for fantasy horror is The Helm of Midnight by Marina Lostetter. This was such a surprise for me when I read this one. I think this one is the one on this list out of all of them that is like the oldest one on this list. Like I read it a long time ago, so this one kind of doesn't fall under like the recent reads category, but I don't read horror fantasy very often, so this is my recommendation for it. And I really enjoyed this when I read it. It was just such an interesting look at the elements of horror that already exist in the fantasy genre and how that can be magnified and spun into a very interesting kind of of chase for this mythological level serial killer that's come back and is embodying someone else's body through a mask. So this world is very, very interesting. I think that's what really caught my eye with this one, is the level of world in here that layers the horror elements into the actual world building. So we have very creepy creatures when they attack people. It's scary. There's like things with essence that you can attack them with. There's specific people who are trained to attack these creatures, and you have to have certain bottles of essence on you to like attack them. It's been a while since I read this. This is what I remember. And it also has a very interesting like gem magic system and a mask magic system. So our main character has 2 gauntlets. She is one of these guard people who are trained to take care of these creatures that come out and can attack the populace. She also has 2 different bracers that are imbued with like strength and courage or something like that. Like they're imbued with a feeling that thus she gets imbued with because it's the magic, which is so cool. And then there's masks, like sort of death mask-esque. People can put it in their wills that they want their knowledge to be put into a mask, like what specifically they want in their masks. What a cool concept. And then people who wear those masks afterwards basically take on that like leftover spirit of the person in the mask and like learn all their knowledge. So very cool. Beginning of this, main character is working a job of like a gallery type of thing where it's showing off all these masks. And one of the prized things in this gallery is a mask from a serial killer, because the mask contains the essence of the serial killer. Someone steals it and then people start dying. So I highly recommend this one. There's something about the elements of fantasy and horror that just go so well together in my opinion, and I need to explore more of this. So if you have any more recommendations for specifically the fantasy genre with horror elements, leave them down below because I will be adding them to my TBR. Even as someone who doesn't love spooky stuff, fantasy horror just gets me. I don't know what it is. It's just so well done. I think because the fantasy, like supernatural elements go hand in hand with horror in a lot of elements. But I think what really gets me for super spooky stuff is when, even though it's in a fantasy world, if the horror elements still are very real. I think that that's what really gets me. It's like, oh, even though this is a fantasy world, like this could still happen. Oh my God. Next, we're gonna go with, let's go here. Fantasy with romance at the heart of it. So I wouldn't necessarily call these romantasy. Maybe I would call the first one a romantasy almost, but like I feel like when I say the word romantasy, it comes with a bunch of expected connotations. So neither of these really are romantasy, but they are fantasy genre with romance underneath. One of them is actually historical horror fantasy as a big blanket genre with romance underneath, and that is The Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. This one is so hard to classify into one singular genre, and I am keeping it here in fantasy because it has vampires. But I guess it would almost work better as a historical recommendation because it's historical. It's a historical novel. It's gothic, you know? It's got the landscape of the Mexican border, and it's got like the war between the Texan Yankees and the Mexican locals, and it's set in the 1840s. So it's very historical based, but it has vampires and magic. Like homegirl, our main character, Nena, can do like healing magic, essentially. She can commune with spirits and herbs and stuff. So it's gonna be part of my fantasy recommendations today. Anyways, this has a romance at the heart of it because it basically, like, I don't know if you guys know this, I sometimes give recommendations and talk about plot and stuff without remembering that not everyone has studied plot like I have, plot structure like I have as a writer myself. So this has like a plot is the war that's happening between the Ranchos and the Yankees, right? B plot is the romance between Nestor and Nena, you know? And then like the C plot is the vampires. So it's like the romance this is a romance book, right? Like it is deeply, deeply just a romance book, but wrapped in a historical horror fantasy blanket, you know? Like it's got so much going on, but it also is a little slower, is a little softer, that kind of thing. But This, so fucking fantastic. It is so atmospheric. It is so delicious. I love the gothic elements. I absolutely adore the romance in here as well. Nena and Nestor are childhood best friends. They love each other so deeply as children. Something happens to Nena. She is attacked by this creature in the middle of the night. Nestor brings her home, thinks she's dead, and he runs away because he cannot handle life without his love and bestie, Nena. Nena, not actually dead. She was just attacked by one of these vampire creatures. 9 years later, this war is coming to the ranchos and threatening these families involved. So Nestor comes home because he hears of this war and he sees Nena totally fine. She so pissed off at him because he just left her for 9 years without warning or explanation. Oh, it's this like push and pull between this childhood best friends to strangers to like some, I wouldn't really call them enemies because Nestor is so fucking in love with her. It's like this animosity between them where like Nena really just is so mad. And it's a little bit of miscommunication, but also not, because Nestor explains himself very clearly as to why he left and why he stayed away for so long, because he thought she was dead. It's not really a miscommunication trope because I hate that trope. This one just has a really good relationship at the heart of it. Anyways, yeah, it's their relationship. It's that animosity, kind of bantery, don't talk to me vibes to lovers, of course, with the war and the vampires and the threatening of their families and livelihoods at the heart of it. Like, it's so good. And then on the other side of that, same like fantasy with romance in it, That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. I recommend this for a very specific reader and a specific reason. All right, so this follows Cinnamon, our main character here, who is a human, and she and her family kind of runs like a cinnamon farm. She's a spice trader, and she does not want to ever go on a quest. However, at the beginning of this, a demon shows up and is like, hey, guess what? The ruler that you thought was all benevolent and shit is actually really terrible. You and me, we're gonna go take her down. And she's just like, oh gosh, you're so beautiful and sexy. How can I say no? So it's that. This book, I only gave like 3 stars myself, but I think if you're looking for a really, really fun, romantic, lighthearted, does not take itself seriously, and executes exactly what it set out to give you and do with a very fun rom-com level fantasy book, pick this up. It's so steamy, it's so funny, it's just genuinely a very fun book to pick up and read. We are now going to be looking at some fantasy with high level, intricate, really intelligent world building, and also some incredible interpersonal relationships. I don't know what that category could fall under, because these are more like traditional fantasy, but I guess you could also say there's like a little bit of a sprinkling of sci-fi in both of them. I don't know. Anyways, the first one is The Surviving Sky by Kritika Rao. This blew me away, all right? So it has at the heart of it, like, it is a very slow churning fantasy. At the heart of the story is the relationship between Ahelia and Aravan, a married couple who are having marriage scruples, if you will. And at the same time, the world they're living on, these floating cities, is crumbling as they know it. Stuff is happening, and Aravan is an architect who is one of these really high-level people who basically keeps the city afloat, and they have a very specific kind of magic system that they can do. And Ahelia is an archaeologist in a world that does not prize any sort of science over what the architects do over anything else. Like, she's not very beloved or anything. She's only like known as basically Aravan's wife. So in this world, it's very interesting with all of the floating cities and the world building in here. This world building is some of the greatest world building I've ever come across. A lot of the things that are discussed about the architect's magic, a lot of the stuff that Aravan himself says about their magic goes right over my head. I don't really understand it. It's very highbrow, but the world building and the interpersonal relationships in here are so wonderfully done, and they're so well interconnected. It's so cool. So yeah, I think that's basically, yeah, it's like a jungle planet floating. I think I described it when I first read this, I compared it to Critical Role's Exandria Unlimited with all the floating cities. If you focus specifically on Loquacious and Laren, that meets the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. It's so good. Highly recommend. Then we have, of course, N.K. Jemisin, but not the Broken Earth trilogy. We have the first in her Inheritance trilogy. So this is the 100,000 Kingdoms. Oh boy, what a read. This follows Yena, who is, at the beginning of this, claimed as a third heir to the king, and basically told, like, this choosing of my heir and who is going to become the successor happens in like 2 weeks. Whoever's left standing is basically going to be my heir. So it kind of sets it up almost like a competition book, but it's not a competition book. There's a lot of stuff going on. So it's 2 weeks of Yena trying to balance the politics of this world that she's been dropped into. The entire city, the city of Sky, is kind of populated by her extended family. It's very interesting. Like every single person with a mark on their forehead of some kind is a descendant from this king and is related to Yena in some way. And so she's trying to essentially figure all that out. At the same time, she's just been asked by one of the gods that's living there, who's been chained to a mortal body. There's 4 of them. She's been asked by them to help them with something because they've picked her for some reason. And so it's these interpersonal relationships between the gods and Yena, and also her trying to figure everything out in the politics in this world in 2 weeks of her living there, and also her coming to terms with the fact that she's going to die. Like she looks at her 2 cousins who are also the heirs, and she's like, there's no way that I'm not going to die because one of these 2 is going to be the heir. It's basically me just picking which one I'm going to put my lot in with. So it's this survival politics, romantic as well in different ways, kind of a world at the same time that Yena is trying to figure out what happened to her mom, who passed away, who was believed to be murdered, assassinated 4 months prematurely. Like, why did she die? It's got so much going on. I love this. 5 star. Oh, it's so good. All right, the last fantasy category we have today is cozy fantasy, because you guys know that's my genre as an author, currently anyway. So I have to recommend my own book. I felt so weird doing this and picking my own book for this, but like, how could I not? First of all, it's sapphic, so it's got 2 wonderful women at the core of it. Perfect for Women's History Month. It's sweet, soft romance book wrapped in a cozy blanket, you know? And it's a fantasy. So we have non-human characters. We have a half-orc and an earth elemental. The half-orc is not even half-human. It's half-orc, half-elf, of course. So no humans are involved in the making of these characters, except for this human right here. I don't know why I said that. Anyways, this is A Little Luck by me. It is the second cozy fantasy book that I've written. The first one is the second story up there, but that one is gay and has 2 boys at the center of it, so I figured, let me recommend this one for you. It is set in the fall, but I think it could be read at any time of the year. It follows Kier, who is the town bard in Arrowmount, and Lottie, who is a thief a little down on her luck, as they come together as strangers and have to basically help run the entertainment part of a fall festival coming up called the Moon Festival. And as they do so, they fall in love. It's slow burn, it's soft, it's sweet, and it's cozy loveliness. Kier basically has dreams but doesn't really think that she will ever follow them, and Lottie needs to readjust her thought process about her future and her career, kind of a thing. So it's got some interesting stuff going on. But yeah, this is my book, and that's why I wanted to recommend it, because you can read it for Women's History Month and it's great. The next cozy fantasy is a cozy fantasy mystery type book, and that is Drinks and Sinkholes by S. Usher Evans. This is book 1 of an entire series about Bev, the innkeeper in this little town, who is an amnesiac innkeeper. She doesn't remember much about her life except for the 5 years that she's been living in Pig's End. In this book, there are sinkholes opening up all around Pig's End, and she basically takes it upon herself to figure out what the shit is happening, what's causing it, or who's causing it. You don't know. It's lovely. It is so soft. It is incredibly well written, and I believe book 4 just came out too, so it's like you're getting the sequels real quick. And it's just genuinely such a lovely, lovely time. And I really enjoyed the mystery part of that. It was very good. Next, we will do sci-fi. So I have 2 sci-fis to recommend. The first one I'm going to recommend is 7 Devils by Elizabeth May and Laura Lamb. This is the first in a absolutely incredible duology that I love so deeply. This is a high-octane heist vibes, bring the dream team together kind of found family sci-fi that tore my entire heart out. It is so good. Okay, so we are set up with two POVs right at the beginning. I don't really remember the names because it's been a little while and I don't have the physical copy with me. My friend is currently borrowing it, so I apologize for that, but we have basically a princess in disguise and a counterpart as like they're now part of the same rebellion group, the rebellious group, and the one hates the princess because she finds out that the princess is not who she says she is, right? Like she realizes that she's the princess to this entire empire. The one character just absolutely hates the princess, but of course they're put together to run this trip, this mission essentially. And in this process, they pick up 3 more people from the empire who are on the run. And then there's a couple people who are kind of like on the periphery, and then by the end they have a 7th member, so there's 7 of them. That's why they're called 7 Devils. But it is an absolutely amazing duology. I love this so much. I love the way it's written. I love the way it's narrated. I highly recommend these. The other sci-fi I have is The Last Watch by J.S. Dewes, or Dowes, or Dewes, or however you pronounce her last name. This is some of my favorite sci-fi I've ever read, and we're getting the 3rd book this year. I'm so excited. So this I like to describe as the last group that humanity has wanted is the last group that humanity basically has to survive. So this group of kind of like misfits, criminals, as I just said, the last group that humanity wants is put on this ship really, really far out at the edge of the universe and is watching this thing called the Divide, which is the edge of the universe. They're basically there to monitor it. And it follows 2 specific people. We have Ada Quinn Rake, who is essentially the captain, and also Cavalon Mercer. And Cav and Rake are just some of the most interesting characters to follow. They have such an interesting relationship between one another. They never have a romantic relationship. They are just comrades and friends. And it's just genuinely so lovely. I love their relationship so much. So it is a deeply, deeply cinematically grand sci-fi where essentially this team at the edge of the universe realizes that the Divide is encroaching, it's coming closer. They have to figure out how to stop it. And they are the last team that humanity has to stop the collapse of the entire universe, essentially. It's very cinematic. They're dealing with ancient alien tech. They're so incredible. It is also so human because we are so grounded in Cav and Rake and their human relationships with each other and other people on the ship. And it's just so good. Highly recommend this sci-fi. And I find it so easy to get through as someone who hasn't read a bunch of sci-fi, because I read this kind of when I was really getting into my sci-fi world, if you will. Really recommend. Before we dive into any like literary fiction or thriller, horror stuff, those are basically the last 2 that I have graphic novels to go through. So I have this really cute little one, Garlic and the Vampire by Brie Paulson. This is such a sweet, cozy read. I love this, and I think this could be good for anyone of any age. It is so genuinely sweet. So it follows a really anxious little Garlic who is part of a witch's garden, and the witch's garden is in an uproar because, oh my gosh, there's rumors of a vampire. And who's gonna go and talk to the vampire? They make Garlic go. It's so cute, and I love it. And it's like this heartwarming story where you're just cheering Garlic on the whole time. It's so good. And the other one is Squire by Nadia Shamas and Sarah Alfagi, I think. And this is such an incredible story. It is my favorite graphic novel of all time. You guys know this. You've been on my channel for a while. You know this. So it follows a young girl who wants to become a squire, become a knight. She is of an oppressed people, lives in this world that is very reminiscent of the Palestine-Israel situation today. And it is her going through this training in a very like fantasy book-esque style montage where she befriends this curmudgeonly caretaker at this camp that she goes to. She's got enemies and friends as part of the people. At the same time, she's like hiding who she is because she knows that like everyone else doesn't like her people for whatever reason. And it's also like a de-illusionment of what war really is in this book for her. This was genuinely so lovely. It's paced so well. I loved every second of this graphic novel. It is so fantastic and the art style is gorgeous. Read this. It is so worth your time. So worth your time. Last 2 categories. We're gonna do this one first. So the next one is my literary fiction picks, and these are more like hard-hitting literary fiction, and they're both by Palestinian authors. So, which also Squire was as well, if you didn't know. First up, we have Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. So this is a very small little novella that packs such an impactful punch. Don't even know how to describe the feeling that this left me with. It follows two points of view. First, it follows the incredibly awful assault on a young woman by a soldier and his retinue. Then the second half follows a modern day Palestinian woman who is researching this event, the seemingly minor detail, and becomes obsessed with it. Oh, it is just so interestingly done. Like the craft of this alone, I could talk about it for hours. It is so wonderfully done. I think it took Adania Shibli, I think I read 10 years to compile this, which makes sense because every single sentence and word and image evoked in this, and every moment of this text is so well thought out, and it hits exactly how Adania Shibli wants it to hit, and it's a masterpiece, and you all need to read this. It is so good. And then the other one we have is Against the Loveless World by Susan Abul Hawa. This follows our main character, Nar, I do believe her name is. Yes, Nar, as she narrates her life from the inside of an Israeli confinement cell. Solitary confinement cell, I should specify. And so it follows her from being a young woman to being married to being, running her own household to living through the occupations and moves, and how she ends up being the breadwinner for her family in very not societally appropriate ways in her society. And it basically narrates how she got to where she is now in the confinement cell. It narrates her going back to Palestine and connecting with Palestine, a place that she is from but has never been before. And it's just such a beautiful story. I highly recommend this. It is so hard-hitting, and I think I described it when I originally read this as one of the most information-forward books that I have read. I learned the most I have ever learned reading this book. That counts textbooks for school. This phenomenal. All right, my friends, the last category before I go over some TBR picks is thriller, mystery, literary, horror vibes. First up, we have Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. This is a fantastic magical realism horror book. I loved this. It has such heart at the center of it. It is so fabulous. So this follows Mackenzie, who has moved away from her family to try gain some space after the loss of one of her sisters. And she wakes up at the beginning of this novel after having a dream holding a severed crow's head. This crow's head eventually disappears, but she has been having these dreams where things are coming through her dreams with her, and they're becoming more and more real and almost prophetic-like. So she calls home and basically is like, this is what's happening to me, please help. She ends up going home. Her family calls her back home, and she finds out that all the women in her family have different powers kind of like this, have different connections to the dream world or to spirit in some kind of a way. And there is something going on. There's a creature preying on this world. And it is also an interesting commentary on greed and the pipeline issues and family and just horror as a genre. It is so good. I absolutely devoured this. So if you've read other Indigenous literature, I can compare this to Moon Over the Crusted Snow by Wabgishig Rice. The tension in that one, tied together with the family aspects of Katharina Vermette's The Break, and also some of the supernatural aspects of Sherry Demelin's Empire of Wild. So it's kind of a combination of those three books, but I liked this one even more than those three books, even though I did really enjoy these three books that I just commented on. Highly recommend. And as a horror book, and as I explained earlier, I'm not necessarily a reader who enjoys spooky stuff. I found this very palatable, and it is not genuinely scary spooky horror, but it's a very good suspenseful horror. Really like it. And then the last recommendation I have for you guys today for Women's History Month, before I dive into my TBR, for just in general, some books that are on my TBR that are written by women authors. I gotta talk about Penance by Eliza Clark, because this book, y'all, this is such a fascinating read. I read this so recently for book club with my friends, and it was so cool. It was so good and so gut-wrenching and disgusting, and this is so interesting. So Eliza Clark has written this, and this is what we get with this book is a fictionalized journalist's piece of work, body of work, their book that they just wrote. This man named Alex something something. And is it Alec or Alex? Hold on, let me just get his name. Alec, my apologies. Alec Z. Corelli. So he becomes kind of obsessed with this case of this murder, this brutal murder of a teenage girl by 3 other teenage girls in a very small, not well-known English tiny town kind of a thing. And so he goes and he sets out to write this book, which we are reading. It's called Penance, and it follows, it like maps out the lives of these teenage girls and the town that they live in and everything. And it's such an interesting commentary on true crime and the fandoms that come with true crime. And that's what I'm gonna leave that one with, because you gotta go in not knowing really anything with that one. But please look up trigger warnings, because the first chapter we get a girl who was murdered, and we get how she was murdered, and the lead up to her actually taking her last breath as she walks away from the scene where she was set on fire trying to find help. It's brutal. It's brutal, and like some of the content in here follows school shooters, and the depictions of a lot of this content is so intense. So please look up trigger and content warnings if you like, just do it anyways, even if you don't need it, because you might be like me who doesn't get triggered at pretty much anything, and you might just need a warning for what you're getting into, because this book made me feel feelings so visceral I have never felt reading a book before. So just warning you. Anyways, all right, I'm gonna rapid fire my TBR because as you can hear, my fridge just kicked in. So some of the TBR books that I have written by women authors. We have Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. This is a dark academia standalone fantasy book. We have Courting Samira by Amal Awad. This is a Palestinian-Australian romance. We have The Spare Man by Mary Robinette Kowal, which is a murder mystery, highbrow kind of thing in space. We have Little Fish by Casey Plett, which I believe is a literary, I don't even know how to describe this one. Alternately warm-hearted and dark-spirited, desperate and mirthful, Little Fish explores the winter of discontent in the life of one transgender woman as her past and future become irrevocably entwined. It's set in the city that I live. And then we have White Horse by Erica T. Worth, which is a Indigenous horror magical realism book as well. That's it for me today. Leave your recommendations below, and I will catch you in another video very soon. Stay calm and keep on reading.